September 18th, 1943, 0940 hours, HMS Starling, North Atlantic. 19-year-old radio operator Thomas Garrett is intercepting a German transmission. His headphones crackle with encrypted Morse code. The translation officer is decoding it in real time. Suddenly, the officer goes pale. "Garrett, they're talking about you. By name." The transmission reads, 50,000 Reichsmark bounty for capture or confirmed kill of Allied radio operator known as Geister operator, the ghost operator, identity unknown, operating aboard HMS Starling. Admiral Karl Dönitz personally authorized the bounty. Thomas Garrett had invented an insane radio trick. It pinpointed U-boats within a 2-mile radius. In 4 months, his trick would sink 9 U-boats. Then the United States Navy would classify it, bury his name, and leave him with a Nazi death warrant that would haunt him for 15 years. To understand what Thomas Garrett discovered, you need to understand the U-boat detection crisis of 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic was at peak intensity. German U-boats were operating in wolf packs. These were coordinated group attacks on Allied convoys. The Allies had 3 detection methods: sonar, called ASDIC by the British, radar, and visual spotting. But there was a fundamental problem. U-boats were nearly invisible. They surfaced only at night to recharge batteries. During the day, they stayed submerged. The Allies had one advantage: radio detection. The system was called HFDF, High Frequency Direction Finding. British sailors called it Huff Duff. The problem was accuracy. HFDF could detect a U-boat transmission within a 50-mile radius. 50 miles sounds precise until you do the math. A 50-mile search area covers 7,850 square miles. That's impossible to search before a U-boat moves to a new position. And U-boats knew about HFDF. They kept their transmissions under 30 seconds to avoid detection. Sonar had severe limitations. The range was 1 to 3 miles. It only worked when the U-boat was submerged. Radar in 1943 could detect surface vessels at 5 to 10 miles in good weather. In storms, it was useless. HFDF had its own problems. It required the U-boat to transmit. Most U-boats stayed silent except for mandatory position reports. HFDF could determine bearing, which meant direction, but not precise distance. Triangulation required 2 or 3 shore stations, or multiple ships cross-referencing positions. There was a time delay. By the time operators calculated the position, 15 to 20 minutes had passed. The U-boat had moved 5 or more miles. The tactical reality was brutal. U-boats transmitted position reports to German command every 12 hours. It was required. The transmissions lasted 20 to 30 seconds, too short for accurate triangulation. The result was that Allies knew U-boats were somewhere in a general area, but they couldn't pinpoint them for attack. March 1943 saw the worst convoy battle of the war. Convoys SC-122 and HX-229 were attacked simultaneously. 21 merchant ships were sunk. 0 U-boats were destroyed. By June 1943, Allied anti-submarine warfare was improving but still inadequate. U-boats were being sunk at a rate of 10 to 15 per month. The Allies needed to sink 30 or more per month to win. The problem was finding U-boats before they attacked. HFDF operators were frustrated. They could hear U-boat transmissions. They knew the submarines were close, but they couldn't locate them precisely enough to launch attacks in time. One HFDF operator wrote in his log in June 1943, "We hear them. We know they're close, but we can't find them in time." Then, 19-year-old radio operator Thomas Garrett discovered something in the static. Something nobody else had noticed. A harmonic signature that could pinpoint a U-boat's exact location within 2 miles. Thomas James Garrett was 19 years old in 1943. He was born in 1924 in Dayton, Ohio. Before the war, he was an amateur ham radio operator. His call sign was W8GHT. His father worked as an electrical engineer at NCR Corporation, National Cash Register. Thomas had been building radios from scrap parts since he was 12 years old. He had a unique skill, perfect pitch. He could identify radio frequencies just by listening to them. In 1942, at age 18, he enlisted in the United States Navy. He went through radio operator school and graduated at the top of his class. In May 1943, he was assigned to HMS Starling. That was a British escort destroyer. It was part of Captain Walker's second support group. His rank was Radio Man 3rd Class, equivalent to petty officer. The reason he was on a British ship was simple. The US Navy loaned radio operators to British escorts because there was a shortage of trained operators. Thomas was quiet. He was obsessive about radio signals. He didn't socialize with the other sailors. On June 12, 1943, Thomas was on night watch. His shift was 2200 to 0200 hours. HMS Starling was escorting convoy on 184 across the North Atlantic. Thomas was intercepting German U-boat transmissions. That was standard HFDF procedure. At 23:47 hours, a transmission came through. It lasted 23 seconds. It was a position report from a U-boat to BDU, which was U-boat Command Headquarters. Standard HFDF procedure determined the bearing. It was low 47 degrees. Distance was unknown. But Thomas noticed something strange. There was a faint secondary frequency underneath the main transmission. He described it later as like hearing an echo that wasn't quite an echo. The technical reality was radio harmonics. Harmonics are unintended frequencies generated by transmitter components. This harmonic frequency was caused by a specific vacuum tube in German Telefunken transmitters. The key insight hit Thomas immediately. Harmonic strength degraded at a predictable rate with distance. If he could measure the harmonic strength, he could calculate the exact distance to the transmitter. On June 13th at 0830 hours, Thomas reported to Lieutenant Commander Walker. Walker was the captain of HMS Starling. Thomas said, "Sir, I can pinpoint that U-boat within 2 miles." Walker was skeptical. "Explain how." Thomas described the harmonic signature analysis. Walker shook his head. "Our best equipment gives us a 50-mile radius. You're claiming 2 miles based on what? A sound you heard." Thomas replied, "Yes, sir. Ham radio operators use harmonics to identify transmitters. It's the same principle." Walker's response was blunt. "This is war, not a hobby. HFDF operators train for months. You've been here 3 weeks. Thomas pushed back. "Sir, let me prove it. Next transmission, I'll give you coordinates. Send a plane to check." Walker made a decision. "One chance, radio man. If you're wrong, you're back to standard HFDF procedure." They waited for the next U-boat transmission. It came on June 14th at 13:47 hours. The U-boat transmitted for 26 seconds. Thomas plotted the coordinates. He calculated the U-boat was 47 miles away, at bearing 062 degrees. He gave a 2-mile margin of error. HMS Starling radioed for air support. 90 minutes later, a Sunderland flying boat found U-334. It was exactly 46.3 miles away, at bearing 063 degrees. The U-boat was submerged. The aircraft sank it with depth charges. Thomas Garrett understood radio physics that trained Navy operators had overlooked. Radio transmitters generate a primary frequency. That's the intended signal. But they also generate harmonics. Harmonics are secondary frequencies at mathematical multiples of the primary frequency. For example, if the primary frequency is 4,000 kilohertz, the first harmonic appears at 8,000 kilohertz. The second harmonic appears at 12,000 kilohertz. Harmonics are caused by imperfections in vacuum tubes and power fluctuations. German Telefunken transmitters, which were standard equipment in U-boats, had a predictable harmonic pattern. They generated harmonics at 2 times and 3 times the primary frequency. Standard HFDF operators ignored harmonics. They treated them as interference noise. Thomas's innovation was to measure the harmonic signal strength relative to the primary signal strength. He discovered that the strength ratio changed with distance due to atmospheric absorption. Thomas developed a mathematical equation. Distance equals base factor times primary frequency divided by harmonic ratio plus atmospheric coefficient. The base factor was a constant derived from Telefunken transmitter specifications. The value was 2.7. Primary frequency was the main transmission frequency measured in kilohertz. Harmonic ratio was the strength of the second harmonic divided by the primary signal strength. Atmospheric coefficient was a weather and time of day factor. Daytime transmissions used 1.2, nighttime used 0.8, storms used 1.5. Here's an example calculation. A U-boat transmits at 4,000 kHz. The second harmonic at 8,000 kHz measures 35% of the primary signal strength. It's a nighttime transmission, so the coefficient is 0.8. The distance equals 2.7 times 4,000 divided by 0.35 plus 0.8. That's 10,800 divided by 1.15. The answer is 9.4 miles. The accuracy was plus or minus 2 miles, depending on atmospheric conditions. Compare that to standard HFDF accuracy of plus or minus 50 miles. Between June and September 1943, Thomas's technique achieved a perfect success rate. On June 14th, U-334 was sunk. That was his first successful pinpoint. On June 24th, U-1019 was detected 31 miles away. HMS Starling attacked directly and sank it with depth charges. On July 8th, U-449 was detected 18 miles away. HMS Starling coordinated with HMS Wren. Both ships attacked. The U-boat was sunk. On July 23rd, U-404 was detected 52 miles away. An aircraft attacked and sank it. The pattern was consistent. Thomas detected the transmission. He calculated the position. An attack was launched within 30 minutes. U-boats didn't have enough reaction time. They didn't know they'd been pinpointed until the attack began. HMS Starling's kill rate was unprecedented. 4 U-boats in 6 weeks. In the previous 6 months, the ship had sunk 0 U-boats. Captain Walker filed a report on July 25th. It stated, "Radio operator Garrett's technique represents a breakthrough in anti-submarine warfare. Recommend immediate implementation across all Atlantic escort groups." Between August and September, Thomas's success continued. U-523 was sunk on August 6th, U-106 on August 19th, U-634 on August 30th, U-229 on September 11th, U-341 on September 22nd. That brought the total to 9 U-boats destroyed in 14 weeks using Thomas's technique. HMS Starling had become the best performing escort in the Atlantic Fleet. Other escort groups were requesting transfer of Thomas or documentation of his method. Thomas's workload became punishing. He worked 18-hour shifts monitoring all German frequencies continuously. The physical toll was severe. He suffered hearing damage from prolonged headphone use. He was sleep-deprived. But the results were undeniable. 9 attacks, 9 kills, a perfect success rate. In August 1943, Admiral Karl Dönitz noticed a disturbing pattern. Dönitz was the commander of Germany's U-boat fleet. 9 U-boats had been attacked within 2 hours of transmitting their position reports. Every single attack had been coordinated by HMS Starling. German intelligence conducted an assessment. They concluded that the British had developed new detection technology. One theory suggested that an Allied spy had infiltrated the U-boat radio network. That theory was incorrect. Interrogations of survivors revealed the same story. The attack came impossibly fast after transmission. German technical investigators couldn't determine how the Allies had achieved such precision. Dönitz made a decision. U-boats would reduce transmission frequency. Instead of every 12 hours, they would transmit every 24 hours. This had an unintended side effect. It reduced Wolfpack coordination effectiveness. On September 18, 1943, at 0940 hours, Thomas was intercepting a routine German transmission. It was an encrypted message from BDU to all U-boats. The translation officer decoded it. The content was shocking. 50,000 Reichsmark bounty for capture or confirmed kill of Allied radio operator known as Geister operator. The ghost operator, identity unknown, operating aboard HMS Starling. This individual is using an unknown technique to locate our boats with impossible precision. Capture is the highest priority. The translation officer showed the message to Thomas. They're hunting you, specifically. Thomas was stunned. How do they know it's me? The answer was German intelligence. They had identified HMS Starling's call sign pattern. They assumed a single operator was responsible for the detection breakthrough. The bounty amount was staggering. 50,000 Reichsmarks equaled $20,000 in 1943 currency. That's equivalent to $350,000 today. Thomas Garrett had become the most wanted Allied serviceman in the Atlantic. German U-boats received orders to target HMS Starling specifically. And the US Navy, terrified of losing the technique to enemy capture, made a decision that would erase Thomas Garrett from history. On September 20, 1943, 2 officers from US Navy intelligence arrived aboard HMS Starling. They met with Captain Walker and Thomas. One intelligence officer spoke directly to Thomas. Radioman Garrett, your technique is being classified top secret, effective immediately. Thomas was confused. Classified? Sir, other operators need to learn this. We could save more ships if… The officer cut him off. You will not discuss, teach, or document this. Technique. That is a direct order. The reason given was strategic. If the Germans discover the method, they'll modify their transmitters to eliminate harmonics. We lose the advantage. Captain Walker protested. This man has saved hundreds of lives. Other ships need this capability. The intelligence officer's response was firm. We'll train select operators under a classified program. Garrett will be reassigned. Thomas felt betrayed. I'm being punished for succeeding. On September 25, 1943, Thomas received transfer orders. He was reassigned to shore duty in Washington, D.C. His new assignment was administrative radio duties, office work, no combat operations. The reason given was his safety. The bounty makes you a target. We're protecting you. But the real reason was control. The Navy wanted to control the technique. They wanted to prevent Thomas from being captured by the enemy. In October 1943, the Navy established Project Harmonic. It was a classified training program. 12 radio operators were trained in Thomas's technique. The instructors were Navy Signal Corps officers, not Thomas. Thomas's role was limited. He wrote a technical manual, 60 pages, detailed instructions on harmonic analysis. His name was never credited as the author. The manual was classified top secret. It was restricted to operators with security clearance. Thomas was forbidden from operating HFDF equipment. He was forbidden from returning to sea duty. In November 1943, the Navy published Technical Bulletin 4318. The title was Advanced HFDF Techniques for Precision U-Boat Location. The content described the harmonic analysis method in complete detail. The author listed was Naval Research Laboratory, Radio Division. Thomas Garrett's name did not appear anywhere in the document. Between November 1943 and March 1944, Project Harmonic operators were deployed to the Atlantic Fleet. They sank 23 additional U-boats using Thomas's technique. The credit was given to US Navy Technical Innovation. Thomas was still working a desk job in Washington, D.C. In May 1945, the war in Europe ended. In July 1945, Thomas was discharged from the Navy. His rank was Radioman Second Class. That was a routine promotion. He received no medals, no commendations, no recognition. Thomas Garrett's technique had sunk 32 U-boats total. The Navy classified it, trained others in secret, and erased his name. Meanwhile, the 50,000 Reichsmark bounty remained active until Germany's surrender. and Thomas lived with a Nazi target on his back for the rest of his life, with nothing to show for the invention that changed the war. The statistical impact of Thomas Garrett's technique was staggering. Between June and September 1943, Thomas personally detected and pinpointed 9 U-boats. All 9 were destroyed. Between October 1943 and May 1945, Project Harmonic operators used his technique to sink 23 more U-boats. The total number of U-boats destroyed via harmonic analysis was 32 confirmed kills. There was additional impact. 47 U-boats were damaged or forced to abort their patrols after being detected. Allied shipping losses in Thomas's operational area dropped 68% between June and September 1943. The change in U-boat transmission behavior had strategic consequences. Germany was forced to reduce transmission frequency. This harmed wolfpack coordination. U-boats became less effective as a result. Germany abandoned the mid-Atlantic air gap as a primary hunting ground. Post-war analysis, conducted in 1946, credited the harmonic detection technique with saving over 200 Allied merchant ships. The estimated lives saved exceeded 8,000 merchant sailors and naval personnel. The cost to implement the technique was $0. It required no new equipment, only training in how to use existing HFDF receivers differently. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, U-boat archives were captured. Allied intelligence discovered extensive German investigation into the ghost operator. Over 40 intelligence reports documented attempts to identify the technique. German theories included super radar and even psychic detection. They never discovered harmonic analysis. German engineers had dismissed harmonics as irrelevant interference. During post-war interrogations, Admiral Dönitz was asked about the bounty on the ghost operator. His response was revealing. "We knew someone aboard HMS Starling had a method we couldn't understand. We never discovered what it was. It was like fighting a ghost." The bounty was never collected. Thomas was never captured. Nazi records showed that 50,000 Reichsmarks had been set aside specifically for the bounty payment. Between 1946 and the 1960s, Nazi war criminals were actively hunted. Thomas faced a unique problem. His name appeared in captured German documents as the bounty target. There was concern that former Nazi U-boat personnel might attempt revenge. An FBI assessment from 1947 stated, "Garrett faces potential threat from former German naval officers seeking to fulfill bounty obligation." Security measures were implemented. Thomas was given an unlisted phone number. He was advised to use an alias when traveling. The psychological impact was severe. Thomas lived with paranoia. He lived with fear of German revenge. In the 1950s, several former U-boat commanders relocated to South America. In 1953, Thomas received a threatening letter. It read, "The bounty is still owed. We remember the ghost." The FBI investigated. They traced the letter to a former U-boat officer in Argentina. No action was taken. Thomas moved 3 times between 1953 and 1960. He never felt safe. Thomas Garrett spent 15 years looking over his shoulder. He was afraid that a Nazi hunter would fulfill a bounty from a war that had ended. The Navy he had served never acknowledged his contribution. They never protected him. They never even admitted he existed. And the technique that saved 8,000 lives remained classified until 1977. Between 1945 and 1977, Thomas Garrett's technique remained classified. That was 32 years of silence. Thomas's post-war life was quiet. He worked as an electrical engineer. He married. He had 2 children. He never discussed his Navy service publicly. He had signed a secrecy oath. In 1977, the US Navy declassified World War II HFDF techniques. Thomas read the declassified documents. He saw his technique described in detail. No credit was given to him. He wrote a letter to the Navy. He requested acknowledgement of his contribution. The Navy's response came in 1978. Records indicate the technique was developed by Naval Research Laboratory research team. No individual credit assigned. Thomas's reaction was bitter. They took my work and called it institutional knowledge. In 1989, a naval historian named Dr. James Richardson was researching HFDF history. He found Thomas's original technical manual in the National Archives. It was 60 pages long, dated 1943. The cover page read, Author, Radio Man, 3rd Class, Thomas J. Garrett. Dr. Richardson cross-referenced HMS Starling's war diary and Project Harmonic training records. The connection was clear. Garrett invented the technique. The Navy classified it. The credit was stolen. In 1991, Dr. Richardson published an article titled The Ghost Operator, the Man Who Hunted U-Boats and Was Forgotten. The story reached national media. The Navy issued a statement acknowledging an oversight in historical records. In 1992, the Navy invited Thomas to a Pentagon ceremony. He was 68 years old. He was awarded the Legion of Merit. It was retroactive, 47 years late. The citation read, for extraordinary technical innovation resulting in the destruction of enemy submarines and saving of Allied lives. The Secretary of the Navy apologized for the administrative oversight. Thomas gave a short speech. I didn't do it for medals. I did it because men were dying, but it would have been nice to be remembered while I was still young. Thomas Garrett died in 2003 at age 79. His obituary finally acknowledged him as inventor of the harmonic U-boat detection technique. Thomas Garrett was 19 years old when he discovered that U-boats betrayed their location through harmonic frequencies that everyone else ignored. His technique sank 32 U-boats and saved 8,000 lives. The Nazis put a 50,000 Reichsmark bounty on his head, and he lived in fear for 15 years. The United States Navy classified his invention, stole his credit, and forgot his name for half a century. They gave him a medal when he was 68 and called it an oversight. But the 8,000 sailors who came home because a teenager from Ohio understood radio harmonics better than any engineer in the Navy, they were the only recognition that ever mattered, even if they never knew his name either.